Lance, listen to me, all right? I need Bob's pain pills.
Bob doesn't have any pain pills.
Yes, he does.
Not anymore. I sold them, but these are good.
What?
No. Wait, yellow are not painkillers. What are they? Just speed. No, they're the X. The painkillers are in the Tylenol. Give him one of these. It'll knock him right out. Thanks.
Welcome back to Growing Up Punk, the podcast about punk rock and all of its friends. We got another interview for you this week. This time, Aaron catches up with Sean Humeston, formerly of VALUE PAC, if you remember them from the late 90s on Tooth and Nail, early 2000s, maybe getting into it a little bit as well. Anyways, over the course of this conversation, they're going to talk about a number of things, about touring in Canada and getting arrested in Canada, also talking about touring with bands the likes of MXPX and even their experiences and relationship with Tooth and Nail Records. There's all sorts of great stuff in this episode. But before we get to it, I will just drop our social media stuff. Go follow us on Instagram at Growing Up Punk, on Twitter at Growing Punk Pod. You can also find Aaron, who you're about to hear do the interview, on Instagram at Aaron Grew Up Punk, and myself at David Growing Up on both Instagram and Twitter. But yeah, we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to hear in a moment the interview, Aaron, with Sean from VALUE PAC. But first, let's get caught up. It is VALUE PAC on Growing Up Punk.
Yeah, so you mentioned you'd played some shows up here in Canada. So you mentioned Medicine Hat in Alberta. What brought you up here? Was it like a specific tour, or was it just kind of one-off shows?
Yeah, back in the day, we worked with a promoting company or promotional company that would schedule events up there. So we'd fly up and we'd spend like a week or two just kind of playing different locations, mostly churches, of course. And then, like I mentioned, the Medicine Hat, I believe it was an all boys like college or maybe even a high school or something like that. But
okay,
that was actually probably one of the most, I don't know. It was just like one of the most influential shows for me at the time, because I mean, the kids up there were just starving for music, and it was just insane.
Yeah, well, and we got very few, Tooth and Nail bands up here, especially in these parts. So, actually, my first ever punk show was a VALUE PAC show. So it's an honor to have you on and to get to talk about that. It was in Manitoba. It was at a college. It was called Youth Encounter. Have you been in the band at that point? It was probably maybe 2000, maybe even 99.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, that show changed my life. That was fairly soon after Jalapeno had come out, which was, at that time I was, I don't know, maybe 13, 14, so kind of when I was just getting into punk, and we didn't have access to like a record store in the town I grew up in. And so when we would go to the city, we'd get a new album or whatever. And that year for Christmas, I had gotten Jalapeno, and that album just blew my mind. And then I think it might have even been the January, February following Christmas that you guys were at Youth Encounter. So not only did I get, my favorite album, but I also got to see you guys live, and it was amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Any memories from that show? I mean, that was a long time ago. What was that like, kind of driving in Canada and kind of getting to this school that you had no idea about? And like in my mind, it was, the biggest show ever, but I don't know how many people would have been there, maybe 500 or 1,000 or something. Yeah,
we, if I recall, it was pretty big. It's been 20 plus years. It's difficult for me to kind of peel out, each show in comparison to the, hundreds, possibly thousands that we did. But,
right.
But yeah, I always enjoyed Canada. It was just an amazing place where, like I said, kids were just starving for music back in those days. And so they just, we walked into these shows just like we were like, fiend gods.
Yeah. Yeah. What was that like coming up to Canada? Like, you guys were from California, correct?
Yeah. We all grew up in Orange County, California. So we actually started touring quite early on, back in '96, and we did close to 14 national tours between the VALUE PAC years of the stint of those years, and so the Canada trips started kind of coming towards the latter part of the career. So it was kind of no big deal, just flying up there. We just needed to bring our guitars. Everything else was supplied, and we tried to bring our merchandise. I do have a bit of a crazy story. I've never been arrested before, but I got arrested in Canada.
Nice.
Yeah.
What's the story with that?
So we flew up there to do a show in Edmonton, and there was a family that had put us up, for about a 4-day stint. And we had a couple of different venues throughout the city there that we were playing at. And so we had all this merchandise that we had flown up with us, boxes and suitcases full of gear, CDs and T-shirts, hats, you name it.
Yeah.
And, of course, back in those days, that was the majority of the income that we made. I mean, we hardly made any money anywhere else other than just merchandise sales. And so we get to the airport in Alberta, and we get called into this some sort of screening department, and this group of guys tells us that we can't take any of this merchandise into the country, and that we would have needed to get some sort of permit in order to sell all that product. And of course, I was the manager at the time. Of course, I've always been the manager, and I was pretty livid because here's us knowing that we're going to probably be able to sell almost everything that we have to these kids, and get the stuff that they want.
Yeah.
And the authorities said that we had to leave it there, and then when we came back to fly back home, we could pick it up at that time. So luckily we had suitcases that we had our own personal clothing in, that also had, T-shirts and things like that we had stuffed, and they didn't search those. So we had an opportunity to at least bring those with us. But that kind of set the tone. I was pretty upset,
Yeah.
And so on our way back, I was naturally, not too happy with the airport and the policy. And granted, when you look back, you go, well, you probably should have done it right and got the permits and did all that stuff beforehand. But when you're 20 years old, you don't seem to think it's ever your fault.
Right.
So I'm walking through there, and, they had these couple of different security screening sections, and, we're a bunch of hoodlums, we got piercings, tattoos everywhere. And of course the airport staff probably didn't care for our image. And we started getting a little bit of flack on the different departments we had to go through, whether it was, customs or whatever other ways to get back into the country.
Yeah.
We get up to the right before the security line, and there's this guy saying, okay, each one of you guys have to pay an airport improvement fee.
Which sounds like a scam in itself.
Yeah. And I thought to myself, what the heck is that? I mean, what, are you guys serious? Like, yeah, they said in order for you to fly, you have to, anybody outside of the residency of Canada, you have to pay an airport improvement fee. I don't know, at the time it was like $17 a head or something like that. And I completely just lost it. I started yelling and screaming and said, this is ridiculous, and probably used a couple of choice words I shouldn't have. And so they simply were just very calm about it. And they said, well, if you don't pay it, you don't get on the plane.
Wow.
So of course we had to pay it. So as we're getting to the last stop of the actual, screening, what would have then been the TSA type of department there, where you go through and you get scanned with all your baggage and stuff. I jokingly looked over to our drummer, Ben Cater at the time, and I said, "Hey, did you guys hide the guns and the bombs?"
Oh wow!
and they didn't like that. So they pressed this button underneath the counter, and a handful of Mountie-looking police officers came and grabbed me and read me my rights and took me to a holding cell inside the airport there.
Crazy.
And I was actually I was put on detainment and wasn't allowed to leave. So it was kind of crazy. So they ended up calling the host family back to pick me up, and we all missed our flight. They wouldn't let anybody fly out that was with me.
Huh.
They searched all of our gear, all of our bags. They took apart the guitar cases. I mean, they were looking for any kind of paraphernalia that they thought was in there, which obviously wasn't.
Yeah.
And then I had two choices. I was either allowed to fly out the next day, because we missed the flight. Obviously, I was able to fly out the next day and be basically blacklisted from being able to ever come back to Canada.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow.
Or I could go to court at some court district, 30 minutes away from the airport, and plead my case and then pay a fine, and then be back allowed into the country. So that's what happened. The host family picked us up. We went back to their house. The father of the host family drove me drove me back to the airport. I took a ride in a cop car back down to the municipal courts, sat through that whole process, got in front of a judge. He tells me, you're going to have to pay a fine. And I think at that time it was 700 Canadian dollars.
Wow.
And so I had to have money wired for my family and back in California, and I paid it, and then we got on a flight out of there, and that was it.
Yeah,
and I had been back to Canada several times after that, believe it or not.
Okay. Man, like how ticked off were your bandmates about that, and just the host family and your family having to
They were pissed.
Man,
they were pissed.
That is crazy.
Yeah. and it was kind of unnecessary, because the gal that heard me make this statement kind of looked at me with the smirk, like, look, I know you're joking,
right?
But I don't like the way you look, so I'm just gonna call you in,
right?
So they could have easily just said, hey, you know what, that statement's not allowed here. Don't be a fool. Don't do that again.
Yeah.
But even the judge told me that they're trying to make example of foreign people coming into the country and thinking they can do what they want, say what they want,
right.
blah blah. So it was rather scary at those times. I got fingerprinted, and I had to take the whole side picture profile, but I look back at it now, I was like, it was pretty funny.
Yeah, man, that's crazy. Well, I mean, back then, that was still like a decent punishment, but I can't imagine what would happen now if you made comments like that, and like guaranteed you'd just be blacklisted, and they would just send you back and say never come back again.
Well, yeah, because if you remember, this was obviously before 9/11, so that it wasn't as strict, but it did happen to be right around the time of the anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing.
Oh yeah. So
they were, the citizens there were kind of aware that had just reached whatever year it had reached, and of course, here's this punk kid making comments. So
yeah, wow. So was that the last time you guys ever played in Canada?
No, we've been there several times after. We had a couple shows in Toronto, Ontario.
Oh, okay.
Either ones that we actually drove into when we were on the East Coast, or we actually flew into.
And did that come up when you crossed the border?
Nope.
Wow.
Nope.
Oh yeah, that's pretty good then. If they, when you went to the judge and they actually cleared you of that, that's crazy. Because it seems like I hear stories so much now of bands getting denied coming up here because they have some kind of criminal record or arrest or whatever it is. So I think they've cracked down on that a lot in the last decade or whatever. But
makes sense.
Yeah. Well, just speaking of the merch, that was one of my first pieces of merch was a VALUE PAC shirt. So I think I was in maybe grade 7, And at that time, there was this company called Walking Time Bomb that sold these shirts that just had these like, stupid sayings on it, like save a tree, wipe your ass with an owl, or, just these lame shirts that people in grade 7, 8 thought were so funny. So anyways, I'm wearing my Value Pac shirt to school, and kids just thought it was one of those shirts. They were like, Value Pac? I don't get it. I was like, yeah, it's a band. Like, nobody would have known what band shirts were. I grew up in a pretty small rural town, so...
Yeah.
So I'll always remember that, of people coming up to me and being like, Value Pac? I don't get it.
That's fine.
And I just felt so cool because I was like, yeah, you wouldn't get it. It's this awesome punk band you never heard of. So,
do you remember what the shirt looked like?
Yeah, it said Value Pac kind of just in like kind of block letters, and I think underneath it just said jalapeno, maybe in like a red font, maybe even had a picture of a jalapeno or something. So it was a fairly like basic shirt, but
yeah, I was in charge of a lot of the different designs when we made those shirts, so I remember that one.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. I'm still enthralled with band merch, and I love seeing that. So what was your process with that, or what attracted you to that?
To doing the merch part of it?
Yeah. Or yeah,
I really just kind of fell into it because nobody else in the band really wanted to take responsibility, and obviously that was clearly a huge revenue source for us. So we had a guy that was kind of doing the design work and doing the screen printing out of his garage, and then I believe he just got too big and was like, I can't take you guys as a account anymore. I'm moving out of the garage and getting an actual office building. And we were just pretty much considered small potatoes, I believe. So we had to find another screen printing company. And that's where I basically interjected and said, well, let's just do the design work on our own, because that's obviously a big expense. Yeah. So I wouldn't say that I did it all. I mean, I would just more or less just kind of do a rough drawing of some different ideas, and then they would then take it to their computer and put it to a screen.
Yeah, that's cool. So kind of taking it back a bit, how did you get into music, and what was going on in your life when you discovered music, and what were some of the bands that first influenced you?
Yeah, so when I was 16, my parents had been divorced for about 4 years, and my mom started dating this guy by the name of Dan, and Dan was real big kind of rock and roller guy. Loved to play all the classic rock tunes from the 60s and 70s, and he kind of inspired me to start listening to some of the older groups out there, like Blue Oyster Cult and that kind of era of music. And I had a tendency just to almost just get indulged into the classic rock era of that time. And so I believe it was either my birthday or Christmas. He says, "Hey, go up to your room, and there's a surprise up there for you." And I walked up there, and there was this probably a late 80s model electrical guitar. It was called a Hamer. Or Hammer, I guess, however you pronounce it, Hamer. But it's kind of a knockoff thing, more or less like an Ibanez style, but not a huge brand name. And of course, I just fell to my knees and thought, this is the greatest gift I've ever gotten in my life.
That's awesome.
So I made it a passion to start learning how to play guitar, and I was all self-taught. I did everything in my room. I bought myself a little amp and just went to town, started learning, learning through tablature as far as the, way to play Metallica songs and everything that was popular in the early 90s, late 80s at that time. And I felt like I was getting pretty good. And then my best buddy from first grade lived 2 doors next to me. He bought a bass guitar, and we started kind of just learning different songs and things like that. Never played together until years later, but we just kind of had this connection, like, okay, yeah, you play bass and I'll play guitar, and one day we'll just kill it. And so that went on for quite a few years. And let's see, 1996, I was 20. I was 20. Let's see, 18. Graduated in 94, so I was 20 years old. So so I had an opportunity to go to Cornerstone.
Yeah,
awesome. down there in Chicago area, or central Illinois. And so a whole bunch of our friends took a flight out there, stayed in a hotel, went down to the show, and spent 3-4 days down there. And that's when I actually met VALUE PAC for the first time.
Oh, right on.
So they were already on tour after they had released their first album, and they had their original bass player, Isaiah, playing for them as just a 3-piece. And that was when it was kind of like, oh, you're from Orange County, I'm from Orange County. You guys are obviously out there doing your thing, making records, touring the, getting it out there and stuff. And we kind of hit it off. And so what I had eventually learned shortly after that is that Isaiah was going to be leaving. And he was, his heart was in the ministry. And so he just felt like playing in a punk rock band was not his direction. So it was, I think it was just the turn of 1995 to 96. And they came back from that tour right around February. It was around my birthday month. And they called me up and said, hey, we want you to come meet us for coffee or whatever. And so I did. And they just said, hey, do you play bass guitar? And the truth at that time was I'd never picked that instrument up in my entire life.
Yeah.
And so when I looked at those guys, they go, oh, yeah, I've played that before. And he goes, well, yeah, good. Cause we really like your style. We like your personality, and, we had a chance to hang out with you in Cornerstone. And so we think you'd be a good fit to play bass guitar. And I was like, oh, sure. No problem. And then I'm walking out of that meeting going, man, I got to learn how to play. I got to learn how to play bass. So I did. So, it's a fairly natural progression, but of course it is very different. Yeah. And so that's what we did. So from about February of 96 to before September, I just practiced the crap out of my guitar, and we practiced probably 2-3 times a week at one of the local churches that Ben, the drummer, went to, and then we took off on our first 8-week tour with MXPX in the spring or the fall of 1996.
Yeah. Wow. Man, that's crazy that you had to go all the way to Cornerstone to meet a band that was from your area. Like, you just met them just like kind of by hanging out, or how did that happen?
Well, I grew up in a church that all of the members of the Supertones went to.
Oh, right on.
And so that was the reason why we had went to Chicago or Illinois, because we were really there just to support them as some groupies.
Yeah.
But all those guys were in the same ministry that I was in. And so it was kind of a natural progression. Like, here's the Supertones, and then, this is this new band that just got released off of Tooth and Nail, and then we're all kind of just back at the hotel that we all stayed at. And,
okay.
And it was more or less like, oh, you're from Orange County too? Oh, cool. Yeah, you guys are from Irvine. Oh, right on. Yeah, it's like 10 minutes from us. Okay. And then it just kind of took off from there.
Yeah, man, that's such a cool story. So were there like bands or shows you had gone to before Cornerstone? Like, was there a local scene that you were kind of attached with? Yeah,
I mean, I kind of fell in love with Christian music like way back in the day, probably about your age, 12, 13 years old. There wasn't much of it down there, so you get invited to these, Nazarene churches are going to host a Friday night punk rock show, or even back then, punk rock really wasn't even a thing. It was more just metal bands.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'd show up at these, various denominational churches, and they would have these metal shows for, just local artists there, just doing their thing. And I kind of took a liking to it. I thought, man, this is just a really good avenue for young kids to kind of not get in trouble and here's some cool music.
Yeah. Well, what have some of those bands been that were playing there?
Oh gosh, I don't even remember, man. I mean, these were just guys that were just local. I mean, they were just terrible.
Okay.
They were just young kids themselves.
Yeah.
So
there was no bands that kind of took off from there.
No, I mean, I didn't really get back into the whole metal band stuff until, we started touring with bands off of the Tooth and Nail label, like Stave Saker.
Right.
But you know what I mean? It wasn't until later that I got kind of into more of the, that realm of music.
Yeah. So there wasn't like one band that you saw live and it was like, okay, this is what I want to do.
No, it really wasn't, because at the time I didn't have a guitar. I was only, about your age, 12, 13 years old. And so I thought, oh man, there's no way I can learn an instrument.
Yeah.
So I felt like I was kind of late to the party when I started learning guitar at 16, because I just knew that, some of these guys have been playing since they were like 9.
Right. Wow.
Or started off on the piano at like, 6 or 7. So when I got into it, when I got that first guitar from my now stepdad, I didn't really expect it to go anywhere.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't until I got the offer to play with those guys that was really kind of what kickstarted the career.
Yeah. So you had never toured before starting the
Nope.
or joining? Wow.
I never even played in a band before that.
Man, and you were just kind of like, hey, I'm down for the adventure. Let's do this. And just
went
and did it.
Yeah. And I was 20 years old and I had a longtime girlfriend from high school that had planned to, obviously get married and have children with. And all of a sudden, here I am just on these long, 6 to 8 to 10 week tours.
Yeah.
And, it was very trying. That time in my life was probably the most difficult time I can remember, but also the most awesomest.
Yeah. So that relationship lasted throughout that?
Yeah. I actually ended up getting married when I was 21.
Okay.
Which obviously at this time, looking back, is extremely young. I had my first child at the same age.
Wow.
And I toured and played in VALUE PAC pretty religiously all the way through the year 2000 and, well, actually just the end of the year 2000 until I quit.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah, what was that like?
By that time, both my girls were born, and they're still pretty little, but
yeah. How was that kind of
crazy.
Being on the road? Back then there was no FaceTime, or I don't even know if there was webcams back then. Maybe.
Nope.
Yeah. So
we didn't even have cell phones.
Yeah, you just kind of call off a landline whenever you can and hope for the best, eh?
Yeah, we used to have to stop off and find a payphone and call the promoter, make sure everything was on schedule for the time frame, and we'd have to have calling cards, and yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah. So what was that first tour like with MXPX? That would have been was that Life in General, or was Slowly Going the Way the Buffalo was out by then? So
let's see. So it was their.
Like what album would have they been touring off of? What year was that?
So this was the spring, or the fall of 1996. Anyways, if I recall, the CD cover was kind of green and white.
Oh, okay, that was Teenage Politics then. So maybe Life in General wasn't out yet.
That tour was phenomenal. That was kind of like it was my first experience being on the road and traveling with a bunch of guys, and MXPX was just a way bigger group than of course we were.
Yeah.
And those guys were fairly experienced and been touring for several years, and so it was amazing.
Yeah,
it was amazing, but it was also very trying, because this was the first time that you send 3 or 4 guys, because we had a roadie at the time, going out on an 8-week stand away from home, and not being able to have much communication back home, and then learning each other's personalities.
Yeah.
I mean, there were moments where, we wanted to kill each other.
Yeah, that's a whole nother dynamic, especially when you had no experience before. You're just kind of, it's exciting when it starts, but then when you realize, like, hey, I'm with these guys, like, pretty much 24/7 in this small space, you quickly learn, like, okay, this isn't all it's always cracked up to be.
Yeah, because there is no break, right? So it's not like you can just, take a couple days and just go off on your own somewhere, right? I mean, you have to sleep with these guys. You have to eat with them. You have to play music with them. You've got to pray with them. You got to do everything with them.
Yeah.
And not that some of that's bad. It's just that, eventually you break, and you just need, you need some solace.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. Do you remember what you would have gotten paid per show back then?
In the early days, it was pretty minimal. In fact, when we went on the MXPX tour, the first big one, I think we probably got paid, maybe $100-200. But see, again, all of our profits came from the merchandise sales. And since we were considered to be the new, up and coming punk rock band, our merchandise sales just were through the roof.
Yeah.
And we'd make $1,000-1,500 a night.
Wow.
Just selling our gear.
Yeah. Well, that was made by support bands back then too. So
yeah. That was super helpful, and that put gas in the van and kept us going and fed us, and we stuck to a pretty strict budget, to make sure that we were having enough cash flow. And of course, I was in charge of that as well.
And so did that take you into recording Jalapeno, or was there a number of tours kind of in between that first album and Jalapeno?
Yeah, I think we did about four tours from that first tour with MXPX in 96 to getting back into the studio. And then some of those tours were smaller, like, that we'd go like on a 2 or 3 week, like West Coast stint, where we'd leave from, Orange County, California, and just kind of head up like Oregon, Washington, maybe cross over, hit a couple spots in Idaho, and then come back down through, Nevada.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to say we got back into the studio around 97, late part of 97. Because I think that album actually got released in 98, if I'm not mistaken.
So what was your relationship with Tooth and Nail at this point?
So to be honest with you, Tooth and Nail and me never really got along.
Oh, what's the story there, if you don't mind sharing?
Even from the beginning days. We just had a kind of a bad experience. When they did release Jalapeno, we wanted to tour, the heck out of it and get it exposed as fast as we could. And so we happened to have a show up in Seattle on our way up the West Coast before we started heading east. And we got up there and, of course, stopped in at the label because it was right there in town.
Yeah.
And we wanted to pick up a handful of CDs so that we can sell them on the tour. And they wouldn't let us.
Weird.
And I still can't recall as to the reasons why, but they basically said, no, you're not selling the CDs. Because I think they were holding them off to maybe put them into stores and make the profit on their end.
Okay.
Rather than selling to us at a discount so that we can then in turn, turn around and sell them for a couple bucks more and make a profit.
Right.
I'm not sure how that went down, but I butted heads with the owner of Tooth and Nail's manager. I can't remember his name now. But basically we ended up just somehow finding the warehouses to where they store the CDs, and we just took them.
Wow. So how did that end up for you? Of
course, we paid for them. We paid the money for them, but we took them against their will, and I don't know how many boxes we took. I think there was about 30 CDs in a box, so I think we probably took about 6 of them, and we paid them back, but but they didn't like that.
Which is so crazy. Like that, you'd think they would want their bands to succeed on the road and get the music out, which promotes the label. Like I've never heard of that before. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was a bit strange. And of course, I was still kind of trying to learn the experience or the relationship between, artist and label. But yeah, that happened. And then, ever since then, I can't even remember the guys. Who was the owner of Tooth and Nail?
Brandon Ebel.
Brandon, yes, of course. So Brandon, he was always kind of a bit of a pompous individual, and so he's always been required to be the executive producer of all the albums that get cut on his label.
Yeah.
And when we cut Jalapeno, we told him no, he will not be the executive producer.
Which meant what? That he just wanted to kind of have the final say, and what was his role?
Well, at that time, an executive producer really didn't do anything other than just at that time, it was more or less just the clout of being on there as the executive producer.
Oh, okay. So it's not like he was down in the studio, like hearing the songs or giving any input or anything.
Right. No, I think he showed up to our studio sessions one time, and our manager at the time, Juan Casas, didn't like him either. So they kind of told him to split. And so for the first time out of all of his bands that he had, signed and put music out, he was not the executive producer on our record.
And he was okay, like, to still put that out, obviously. And
well, he didn't have a choice. Obviously he wanted to make his money on the record sales, but he was pretty butthurt about not having that ability.
Yeah. Did the band have a good relationship with him kind of up until that point?
No, I don't think. Ryan, the singer, Ryan Shealy, he didn't care for those guys either. Ben Cater, he could go either way. The drummer, he didn't really seem to have much say in that part of it. But that wasn't until shortly after we cut that album, Ben had left the band anyways.
So what? So you guys are in the studio doing Jalapeno. So you were a part of the writing process for that?
Yeah, there's a couple songs that Ryan and I collaborated on. Most of all the songs on the album, though, were his. His masterpiece. Ryan was an incredible songwriter.
Yeah,
and I was just on the verge of being very marginal.
Right. So what kind of went into the songwriting for that album? Because there's definitely a shift, in the sound. It's not as fast. It's a bit, more mature sounding, so to speak, and a bit more dynamic, song structure wise, and even the overall sound of the album.
Yeah, that's exactly what Ryan and I were leaning towards at that time in our lives. We just we felt like the three chord punk progression style had just been overdone. And so we wanted to figure out ways to incorporate, some of the, ironically, some of the 60s and 70s sounds that you hear, between the Beatles and the Stones, and kind of incorporate that into that newer style of melodic punk rock.
Yeah. Yeah, you can definitely, I wouldn't have even known those bands when that album came out, but I definitely remember thinking like, okay, this album sounds different. It's not as, maybe polished and kind of chunky sounding. And, for me at that age, it was probably more confusing. Like, why does this album not sound as good? But, now that you say that, and now that, I've had, 15, 20 years to listen to it and kind of appreciate, the sound that came with it, and it makes the album stand out as something different. Like even now when I put it on, like I come to love the sound of it.
Yeah. There was a lot of influence with Ryan at the time, really, really getting into the latter part of the Beatles' career. Like the late '60s, early '70s sounds. And so you'll notice a lot of the songs actually have some of those chords, some really heavy minor chords that are commonly used in those types of songs. And then, even the Stones having more of that, soft rock style, that we tried to incorporate. It was actually pretty unique. I was excited to be on that project.
Yeah, and what was the label's response to that? Were they expecting just another kind of fast 3-chord punk album, or was it?
Yeah, they sure were. And so there was definitely some kickback with regards to it being softer, and they weren't too excited about it. So we, just said, well, this is what it is. Take it or leave it.
I mean, it's still upbeat. It's still catchy, and it's not like it's that far gone from the original. But I mean, it seems like there's enough bands on Tooth and Nail that have done similar things. Even thinking like Craig's Brother, right, put out Homecoming, and then Lost at Sea is almost a completely different album. But I guess in their mind, if they've signed this punk band, then I guess they have these expectations too. So I guess it kind of goes both ways.
Yeah, you take for example MXPX. They stayed pretty true to their style through album after album. I mean, they were.
Yeah, who was the producer on Jalapeno?
So we actually had an awesome opportunity to hire Peter King, who was a professional surfer from San Diego.
Oh, cool.
He kind of made himself pretty famous with not only surfing, but he was on the MTV racket as kind of like one of those hosts guys.
Okay.
For many years. And our manager, Juan, at the time had known Peter really well. And Peter actually played in a Christian rock band called Dakota Motor Company.
Oh, yeah.
And so he was, kind of out of the scene, but still in the scene. And so we wanted a fresh new set of ears rather than just bringing in the traditional, Tooth and Nail sponsored producer.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think a lot of his influence too, helped us kind of create and structure some of those songs kind of in his fashion as well, which was pretty awesome.
And was Steve Kravac a part? Do I remember seeing his name on the liner notes?
Steve Kravac.
Did he mix it maybe or something?
That's possible.
Okay. Because he's the one that had recorded, MXPX's Life in General, Slowly Going the Way of the Buffalo. He'd done Slick Shoes and Supertones. And so I actually originally thought he produced the album, but I recently went back to look at my CD to see and realized he wasn't the main producer. Because again, with the sound, I was like, this doesn't sound like a Steve Kravac album. So it kind of made me go back and look. But
yeah, I want to say Steve, because that must have been when we submitted the songs to the mixing and the mastering studio, which was in Los Angeles, and I believe he was in charge of that part of it.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's awesome. He's had his hand on lots of great albums. So I was curious as to kind of if he had any input on the sound of the album. But so after that album gets put out, and then you guys are just back on the road full time again. Yeah,
we hit it pretty hard. Doing all the festival shows, South by Southwest, Cornerstone. I can't even remember half the names of the ones that used to be on the West Coast here. That was a big part of our touring was in the summer.
Yeah.
And so we hit the road pretty hard for 2017, 2018, 2019, and then it was I think it was
2008 and 9. You mean? Or
I'm sorry, 19, yeah, sorry, okay. 1990, 98, 99.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we put out the last album, Incognito, off of a Four Door Records, which is a friend of ours, and I think that was in 99.
Okay. What was the reaction to Jalapeno overall?
From fans?
Yeah, and even sales. Any idea how much that album sold? I'm always intrigued in the numbers part of it.
Man, it's been so long. I honestly can't remember. I want to say that record, the last time I remember, the total was around 60,000 copies.
Okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And did you guys see any royalties from that?
Nope. That was the other issue, we constantly struggle with. that basically the contract that Ryan and Ben and Isaiah signed at the beginning was pretty restrictive. So, of course there was no benefits for us on anything.
Yeah. So you're not only are you not getting CDs as tour support, but you're not even making money off the CDs that you are selling.
Yeah, it was that was a tough blow to learn coming into the band, that that pretty much all of that income is going back to the label.
Yeah. And
I think Ryan, kicked himself in the butt quite a bit, not realizing that's what they had done. They were young teenagers, just get opportunity to sign into a relatively up and coming label, and so they probably just didn't even think about what they were doing.
Yeah. Did it seem like that album was getting promoted well, at least, like whether magazines or press interviews, that kind of thing?
I would say no, but I know it was. But at the time, it probably wasn't to our standard.
Yeah.
There was a big disconnect between us and Brandon, because, we just didn't care for what had happened and how he kind of took advantage of us. And then the whole issue with the CDs, and then the fact that we didn't put him on as executive producer. There was just a whole series of events that kind of just basically, we're both just putting up middle fingers to each other.
Right.
And so in turn, that probably, didn't give us the exposure that we might have probably needed.
Yeah. So you guys, how long did you tour off of Jalapeno?
So I want to say it was up until we cut the last album, which was Incognito. Right. So probably towards the end of '99, turning into the year 2000.
Okay. So once the touring stopped for Jalapeno, was your contract up with Tooth and Nail, or how did that come about?
Yeah, so it was let's see what it was. It was a two album. Let's see, it was a 2-album contract with the option to do a third and a fourth.
Okay.
And so obviously when we got ready to cut Incognito, we were like, no, we're not using Tooth and Nail.
Yeah. So you just kind of split ties with them and moved on.
Yeah, I want to say it was a little difficult. If I can recall, there was kind of some issues with the option to be able to do the third. I think they were kind of under the impression that we would, and we kind of had to fight pretty hard to get released. But the tone was that at the same time they probably didn't care to have us anyways.
Right.
And they were growing like leaps and bounds. I mean, you got like Squad 5-0 and some of those other bands. I mean, they had all those guys just ready and willing to produce albums and make money.
Yeah.
So
what was
we were kind of like, let him go.
Yeah. And so how did you feel kind of going, like, did it feel like you were going backwards at all, going to a smaller label, just knowing maybe it wouldn't have the same distribution and promotion? And
yeah, we had that feeling, but at the same time, we didn't care. We felt like we were so liberated from being under Tooth and Nail for those many years. And we were excited to really have, Chuck Cummings, the owner of 4-Door Records at the time. We were excited to work with him and really kind of put a new spin on some of the songs. And, that's when we started hooking up with guys like Dennis Donnell from Social Distortion and really had an opportunity to make some music that was just typical Orange County punk rock.
Yeah. And how long did you guys go for on that album? Were you still wanting to be on the road full time, or were things kind of starting to slow down by then?
No, everything stopped. So once that album got cut, we never toured again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we, Chuck at the time was having problems with getting his label up and running. He was working on trying to sign bands like Chevelle and
right.
Some of those other heavier rock bands that were coming out of the marketplace. And I think at that time, Ryan had lost his mom to cancer, and I think he was just tired.
Yeah.
He was burnt out.
Yeah.
And so we never toured it, which therefore it never really got off the ground. it got sold in some of the local stores here around the Orange County area, but I think that's about as far as it went.
And then the band just kind of dissolved from there, or did you have, final show, or was it just kind of, that was it?
So what happened was we by that time I had 2 daughters. I think we had done enough successful touring and making money that I was able to afford a house.
Oh, wow.
And so here I am, 2 kids, wife, dog, mortgage. And I just remember Ryan coming to me one day saying, hey man, we're calling it quits with VALUE PAC, but we're going to move up to Los Angeles and try to get, into the secular market and start a new band. Do you want in? And I was like, no flipping way.
Yeah.
Him and I weren't on the best of terms at that time, because he had brought in a new drummer, the guy that you just mentioned, Jason Feldman.
Oh, okay, yeah.
He had brought Jason in to be our fill-in drummer for the few shows that we were still doing.
Yeah.
Jason and I never really kind of hit it off. He was much younger than me, and he had a lot more passion to do whatever it would take to play music, and I was just kind of like, no, I've been there, done that.
Yeah.
So the 2 of them had a plan to basically move up to LA with nothing, than a few bucks in their pocket and try to make it. And that's when I said that I can't do that. I just can't do it.
Yeah. And you, did you feel content with that? You were happy just to be done, life on the road? And
No, I was actually pretty devastated. I remember crying to my mom one day saying, my musical career is over. And about right around 2001, I was able to just join another local band from Orange County that kind of just kept me going.
Okay.
Just to keep playing.
Yeah.
But I also knew that those guys, they're all really heavy into their careers, and so this is just going to be for fun.
Right. Yeah.
And that worked for me.
Yeah. So are those still guys that you're playing with today?
No, I don't play music anymore, man.
Yeah, okay.
I haven't picked up my bass guitar in probably 13 years.
You still have the same bass from when you were playing?
Yeah, it's actually hung on my wall.
Oh, that's awesome.
I have a piano room, and my bass just hangs on the wall.
Yeah. Hey, well, that's cool. At least you get to see it and be reminded of the memories, and that's rad.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an incredible part of my life, and I wouldn't take it back for the world. I learned an incredible amount of patience and being able to establish relationships and understanding people.
Yeah. What would you say were maybe some top standout moments from your time with the band?
Well, there's always the classic stupid stuff we did tour.
Yeah.
There were times where we were on tour with VALUE PAC, and we thought it'd be a great idea to have the vans on the highway come up alongside of each other, and we would light fireworks at each other.
Yeah.
That was always always a classic stupid move.
Yeah. What about show-wise? Any shows that where you kind of, when you think of your time with VALUE PAC, you're like, this was the height of my time with the band?
It's kind of funny, but there are, several videos out there of shows that we played, whether they were festivals or just some really good shows. But there was a show in Orange County it was the last show of the tour that we did with VALUE PAC. It was in the city of Orange, or maybe Anaheim. I think it was Orange. And that was probably the most memorable show, because I think somebody had converted a movie theater into just a huge venue. So they ripped all the seats out.
Oh, cool.
And that place was packed. I think there was probably, 4,000 kids there just squeezed into this.
Crazy.
And they had built this stage that was really high up. And yeah, that was, there's actually black and white video out on YouTube of that show somewhere. And it was pretty memorable.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. I'll have to try to check that out. So did you got to play at Cornerstone? So you met the band at Cornerstone, and then did you guys play there again the following year?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think we probably made 3 appearances afterwards.
Okay. How were those shows?
Those shows were always amazing.
Yeah.
You know, we never got any of the huge tents that were exposure there, but we got some of the decent sized ones, and those tents were packed with kids.
Yeah, I was there in 2002, so I guess I would have missed you guys by then. But yeah, I remember those shows being just amazing.
Yeah, they were great.
Awesome. Well, Sean, I really appreciate you coming on and getting to talk about the band. And is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you wanted to share about it?
No, man, you did a good job of claiming all the gems.
Sweet, awesome. Man. Well, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
When I say Romeo and Juliet, who comes to mind? Dana?
Claire Danes.
That's right, Claire Danes.